Hi, my name is Nancy Wandia. My student ID is S002823363. I'm a member of Group G. Our topic of discussion was on the key roles of the board. In my presentation, I'm going to talk about the role of the board in monitoring and supervision, and ways in which the board monitors and supervises. The board is very important in the general running of an organization. It provides insights by giving strategic counsel on issues pertaining improving performance, legal compliance, and observing ethical standards. It does this by monitoring and supervising. The responsibility of the board is in accordance to the goals and objectives of the organization. With the help of the CEO, the board gives direction to the organization and comes up with the best strategies for the organization to achieve its objectives. This is why the input of the board is very important for the organization to achieve its objectives. The board determines the financial position of the organization. It does this by ensuring that there are financial reporting systems that provide adequate, accurate, and timely reports to the relevant stakeholders. Financial stability is the aim of every organization because it shows how the organization is performing. The board ensures that the code of conduct is followed to the letter. Another way that the board monitors and supervises is by identifying risks and coming up with ways to make sure that the business is not impacted by the risks. The board plays a big part in selecting and evaluating the performance of a CEO. This is why the relationship between the CEO and the board is very important. The board comes up with a vision and the CEO implements the vision. It is the responsibility of the board to make sure that the vision is implemented in a way that ensures good performance while also observing the legal requirements. Hence, a good board of governance is key to an organization achieving its goals. Thank you.
Stages of policy making process. The first one is to identify whether there's needed to make a new policy or update the existing one. The second one is to determine who is gonna be involved, and the third one is to gather the information needed to make a decision. The fourth one is to analyze information and gather discussion for alternatives. Number 5 is to adopt new policy and approve changes to its current policy at board meetings. Number 6 is to implement the new policy, and number 7 is to regulate the new policy. There are 2 approaches, but the first one might be more familiar with our daily life. For example, HR, student services, academic affairs, business and fiscal policy. And meanwhile, the second one is more concentrated with the model of broadmanship, which have some policies towards the governance. The first one is end policies, the second one is the limitation of boundaries policies, the third one is the governing process, and the fourth one is the board staff relationships. 10 basic principles in policy governance. The first one is the trust in trusteeship. It means that the owners gives full authority for the board to speak on behalf of themselves when they're not there. And the second one is the board speaks in one voice or not at all. It means that they have single voice for everything. Board decisions are predominantly board policies. Board policies are the soul of the board, also their beliefs, etc. 4. The board formulates policy by determining the broadest values before progressing to the narrow ones. They look at the bigger picture first. And determination is the pivotal duty of the governance. It means that they focus on the outcomes and reasons why they're there. Board explicitly design their own product process. It means that if they can, they will use their own internal committee to get the job done. Board forge linkage management that is empowering and safe. It means they expect the employee to be honest. Performance is monitored carefully, but only against their policy criteria. It means that they have limitation and will not cover the unnecessary data.
I am going to talk about strategy formulation as the role of the board of directors. The board of any given organization has a set of distinct roles that defines the parameters within which various activities ought to be executed. One of the functions that the board ought to execute is strategy formulation. Strategy formulation defines the approach that the entity or a company ought to take. The board's approach to strategy formulation begins with reviewing opportunities. The board has the mandate to ensure that it evaluates the present and the future opportunities to determine their significance to the progress of the future of the company. Evaluating opportunities also encompasses assessing the external environment, including the nature of the risks, the threats that the strategy formulated presents. The board uses a SWOT approach, which is meant to enhance the understanding of the strengths and weaknesses that are unique to the organization. The board is also mandated with evaluating the range of options that are available. These aspects involves coming up with strategy options that are available and the resources that the organization has at its disposal to be able to meet the parameters of the chosen strategy. The board thus conducts its due diligence to ascertain which strategic options are available, and hence the board goes ahead to evaluate the means that is available to enable them fulfill its parameters, including having necessary support to meet its needs. Additionally, the board evaluates the corporate strategy, including the plans that underpins it. The board plays the role of determining other aspects such as the state of the organization structure, including how it works towards defining the organization strategy. The board can therefore make various adjustments to the organization structure to ensure that it is in line with the corporate strategy. The board can also take up the role of determining the nature of risks that the company is able to handle Through specifying such aspects, the board is able to ensure that the organization works within the parameters of the desirable risks matrix to avoid instances of the company succumbing to excessive risks. Once an assessment of the risk is done, the board has the responsibility to determine the best risk management processes that accurately capture the risk parameters that the organization has set. The board asserts the board plays an oversight role over management recommendation to ensure that they conform to the set strategy. In doing so, it views that the board has unique attributes that works towards enhancing how the processes align, and the board contributes towards linking employees' effort, resources of the organizational structure towards developing the corporate strategy. Thank you.
To save more time and cost for the monitoring and supervising roles, the organization could actually outsource their monitoring management to other firms. We know there's many firms they can provide monitoring management, for example, auditing, mystery shopper, network monitoring, and etc. So overall, the board should prioritize their time and energy on making the best strategy, which could create the largest value for their stakeholders. So this is pretty much for today's presentation. Thank you. So in this part, I'm going to talk about what is accountability and why accountability is important. Second, I'm going to talk about how the board can balance between conformance role and performance role. So accountability is one of the conformance role of the board. It's an external focus which delivers results and accountability to the stakeholders. It shows how well the organization runs the business and how they manage the interests of the stakeholders. So on the other hand, the board needs to assure their performance has complied with the regulations and government's rules. Although the board can delegate the conformance function to different departments, they're still responsible for its performance. So they need to ensure that assessments, for example, financial reports, is accurate and unbiased. So why the accountability role is important? One of the reasons is that accountability can indicate a corporate governance framework. As we know, one of the core principles of corporate governance is accountability. So the investor can actually review their corporate governance framework from its financial reports. So another reason is that shareholders have the rights to know how the corporate is achieving their business goals and what risk factors they are facing and what their control systems are. Accountability could also bring good reputation to the corporates, because when they comply with the government's regulation and industry rules, it can actually lead to good reputation. And the conformance and performance roles are not isolated from each other, because conformance roles guarantee the genuine performance, and performance drive the company forward to achieve its goals. But there's a need to balance between conformance and performance. If the corporate or the board focus on one role at the expense of the other, it may not achieve their goals effectively. But there's no question that the corporate should focus more on the performance, because too much performance is more about forward-looking and value creating, and while conformance role is more about compliance. Too much compliance could stop the company from being forward and being high performance. But at the same time, the board need to guarantee that, to make sure that the management is not going too far. So that's why the monitoring and supervising is as important as strategy forming and value creating.